Welcome to Being Human. Delighted to say I am here with Nik Silver. Nik is a senior technology leader, having done stints at The Guardian, of course, which many of you will know, and a blogger. And I have really enjoyed delving into your blog, Nik, and getting to know you a little bit before we came on this call. Nik, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Richard. Yes, lovely to be talking to you.
Okay, so I talked a little bit about your background as I introduced you, but I think for the benefit of our audience, I wonder if you could give us a potted history. Which brought you to this place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the Guardian is the thing where it was an amazing place to work. I was there for 8 years, leading the software development team and other related teams there on the digital side of things. Before that, I was 8 years at a web agency, and in fact, part of that was my first proper job was explaining to people what the internet was and what the web was and what the difference between the two. I mean, that's I think people are born with that knowledge nowadays. But that was a job once, and that's what I did. I did a research degree, PhD in artificial intelligence before that, but I did not pursue that as a career. There are many smarter people doing that now. And for the last, I think it's about 12 years now, I've been independent, working at lots of really interesting companies, helping them out. The thing I tend to do is help organizations that need to sort of improve the relationship between their software teams, their tech teams, and their non-tech teams. And yes, and I write about it, which is mainly my a sort of mini therapy to sort of work out and explain to myself, articulate to myself little things I have learned along the way.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's me.
Great. And I think that topic of that interface between business teams and tech teams is going to be super relevant for so many of people listening. And whenever I work in businesses, that is a very common theme. So I can imagine you get plenty of work dealing with that issue.
And it's really, a lot of it is just sort of little conversations. But yes, sometimes it is work. As in a sort of a period of working with people. But sometimes people just want to say, can I have an hour of your time to talk through a particular issue I'm having, or I don't I've hired these people, don't really understand how to deal with them, what they're like, that kind of thing. So yes, it's very varied. It's very, very varied.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, it's a big topic, isn't it? Because we're really talking about humans communicating with each other, collaborating with each other. I guess where do you tend to start looking for opportunities to improve things? How do you orient yourself around that problem when you're introduced to organization?
That's a really interesting question. I mean the first thing that is really important to me is and this sounds sort of really basic, but I have to have a problem statement. I have to someone has to come to me and have a reasonably well articulated problem that I am going to solve, and that can be many different things. So there are some sort of fairly some fairly well defined examples that I've dealt with are and these sort of these sound sort of slightly amusing sometimes from the outside, but they're real issues that people have tried to grapple with and sort of not managed. So one was company that was about 200 people said, well, we were a startup once, we were 4 people. And when we were 4 people, everything was so much easier. It was really easy to get things done. And now we're 200 people. It's really difficult and things take ages and we don't know why. And it's sort of, your inevitable reaction is, well, that's because you're, 200 people and there's lots of communication. But, you delve a little deeper, and they have spoken to their people. They've tried to puzzle this out. They've tried things, and it's just not worked out. So that's one example. There's another organisation I worked with that produce sort of a big annual sort of report type thing every year, but it takes them 22 months to produce this report. And again, think, gosh, that's crazy. But you talk to them and talk them through it and think, well, actually, no, this is clearly a difficult problem for many reasons. And of course, they've tried to work it out. So they want someone sort of with a sort of fresh pair of eyes to look at that. Sometimes what I do is just sort of very simply interim tech leadership stuff. As in we are looking for a long-term CTO or VP, Vice President of Engineering, Software Engineering for our company. We just need someone sort of to fill in the gap, and that's a situation where you can't make any big changes to an organization because someone is going to come after you, and they're going to have the big strategy, and you've got to let them sort of come in and do their thing, whatever their thing is. But you've got to keep people together, bring people together. You've got to keep delivering. That's really, really important. And sometimes what I do is just coach people,
right?
Coaching and mentoring people, which is obviously sort of very specific. People are trying to work through their job or the challenges in their job and so forth. But for the most part, it's here is a thing we can't work out, or we would like to solve, and can you come in and sort of help us with that?
Right. And so you're really looking for that to be your starting place, the problem statement.
Yeah.
And then as you start exploring that, do you have like a set of values or a set of principles or something you source yourself from as you start exploring?
That's really, really important. I think the first thing I ask them typically is, partly about the structure of the organization, but also who do I need to speak to about this? And then, I mean, to be honest, in all the things I do, whether it's solving a sort of well-defined problem or sort of interim leadership or coaching, one of the key things I have learnt to do, and or that one has to learn to do, is listen to people. Listening sounds like a very, very basic skill. But it's listening to people, and it's also a lot of time asking the right questions in the right way. So yes, it's speaking to finding out who the people are to speak to, and starting with some parameters, some examples. So hopefully in that initial conversation with whoever it is has brought me in, they will say, well, we had issues with this project or this situation, or this process, takes a long time. So then it's going in, talking to people. First of all, establishing sort of some degree of trust there,
right.
Which is actually usually surprisingly easy, I would say, because if the CEO or whoever it is has been even semi-sensible, let's say, which 95% of the time they have been, they will have laid the groundwork. They will have heard these problems from their people as well. They will have talked to the people in their team, and people on the ground are looking for improvement. They're the ones sometimes who said, we have a problem here or we have a problem there. And I'm hoping that, someone will come in and sort out the situation or at least listen to them. So that initial conversation is, it's kind of, kind of glad you're here kind of thing. I mean, there is right. Literally a sort of, there's a honeymoon period that doesn't last forever. But people are happy to talk. And the other sort of really sort of fascinating thing I have found is if you ask people, particularly in those kind of situations, if you ask people, tell me about your problems, people tell you about their problems. I mean, and that's because nobody thinks they're working in a perfect company. Of course, I tend to work in the tech-ish world, the digital world. So it's full of really, really smart, switched-on people, very internet-connected people, understand what the way other people work and other things that happen. So they've got ideas. They've got insights into how things might be or or things that aren't, they think could be improved and so forth. So most of the time, the vast majority of the time, people are, very open to sort of talking. And there are also, particularly in those situations, there are some sort of ground rules that I have with people, which is I want to be able to quote you, but I will try to quote you anonymously.
Yeah.
Which doesn't always. I have learned. I have done that wrong in the past, because sometimes an individual will have a certain unique turn of phrase, and if you sort of include that turn of phrase in a report, oh, I know who said that. But a little bit more aware of that nowadays, and hearing from people verbatim or hearing people's words verbatim is incredibly powerful at the end of that process.
Right. And you talked about listening, and that's a big theme in the work that I do and First Human that I'm part of. And what have you learned over the years that's improved your listening capacity? Have you?
So I think there are the sort of the obvious ones which you always learn about in management courses and things like that, which is ask open questions, and give time for people to talk. If there's a silence in a conversation, it's very tempting to want to jump in and fill that silence, but try not to. So those are the obvious things, and those are, everyone talks about those things, but those are genuinely useful. I think the other things I would mention, which I don't hear about so often. One of them is I've been influenced by, and I wouldn't say I'm at all very knowledgeable, but influenced by clean language.
Right.
And I was sort of part of a very sort of small clean language sort of experiment, one time demonstration, which was powerful for me. So I won't attempt to recap clean language. I will attempt to recap my understanding of clean language, which is not necessarily the same thing. But it's the idea that when we talk to people, it's too easy, far too easy, to introduce our own ideas and our own biases and our own thoughts and our own models of how the world works into that conversation, most of which is not, using our own language rather than using the words that other people use. So trying to use the same language, the same phrases that people use back at them is very, very useful, because it ensures the conversation stays very much within the world that they are thinking of, rather than a track that you think is the obvious track that you want to take things down. And the way so clean language, and again, my understanding of clean language is, there's something like basically only 12 questions you can ask, of which 3 or 4 are the ones you use 90% of the time. So your capacity to sort of be, to ask wide-ranging questions is somewhat limited, but it means that you get the sort of the person's point of view very much more than your assumptions layered on top of it. And it reminds me of a sort of the very, very earliest artificial intelligence program, which maybe some of your older listeners will be familiar with, called ELIZA. And ELIZA was written in the 60s. Okay, so it's before ChatGPT and all of that kind of thing. And I can't remember who wrote it. But it was a piece of software which basically supposedly acted as a psychotherapist. And it would it would start off with the generic statements, so something, hello, please tell us about, yourself or your problem or whatever. And all it would do is pick up on standard phrases. It just had a list of, 50 things that people would say with sort of blanks in the middle. So it's looking for patterns of check. I feel X, I feel blah. Okay, that's one standard. And the response would be something like, "Oh, tell me, why do you feel blah?" And it had no. It was just simply sort of templates with substituted, whatever the person said in there. And the first people who used it were really, gosh, this is getting really deep and really personal, without realizing they were talking to a actually relatively dumb computer by our standards. And this is obviously very insulting to the clean language advocates out there. But to me, it is like that. It's you've got to be very, very careful with your phrases and language and so forth. But basically, don't layer your own language in there. Don't layer your own phrases in. So that's one thing extra, which is use the person's phrase, use their language, and they will take you down a route which you don't necessarily expect, and is always valuable. The other thing I would say is to try to get a really precise understanding of the fluffier, the more nebulous things that people are talking about. So, and to give you an example of this, I was speaking to someone some time ago who had just got promoted. They'd become responsible for a new team, which was great. And so I was talking to them about their new team, and it was a software engineering team that they were leading. And they said, I am a bit worried about this team. It doesn't have a good engineering vibe, really. And to me, that phrase, "good engineering vibe," that's very fluffy. That's not something tangible that you can do something about. But this person is quite experienced, reasonably senior. That there's probably a reason they're saying that. And so in situations like that, I try to sort of slice it down and try to make it more precise and say, so what do you mean about engineering vibe? And one of the questions I use again and again and again in all kinds of conversations is, what does that look like? What is it you're actually seeing in the world? What is it you're actually hearing in the world that makes you say that? And that sort of makes it real, because that sort of, if I was to, it wasn't relevant in this case, but if I was to sort of explain that situation, if I was using that situation or looking at that situation in order to resolve somebody's problem that they'd given me with problem statement and so forth, I couldn't go in to the CEO and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, your engineering team doesn't have a good engineering vibe," or even your engineering managers don't think they have good engineering vibe, because you can't do something about that, and you can't transfer somebody's feeling to somebody else, but you can try to make it a reality. So he's this person started by saying, "Well, they do deliver very reliably." I thought, well, okay, that's good. That's lots of teams don't deliver, but very, very reliably. So what is it you've seen? He said, well, people are very comfortable with just doing the work they're used to doing, and somebody else will do the work they're used to doing, but they're not really interested in sharing or crossing over or sharing ideas or trying something new. And the technology is a little bit old-fashioned, so it's quite difficult to attract people into the team. And so that became something tangible, and something that potentially he could talk about with the team, to ask them, how interested are you in terms of expanding your skills, or being able to bring new people into the team and so forth. So very often people say something which is understandably woolly because it's just sort of what they feel, but trying to make that a reality, and that question, what does that look like, or a variant of what does that look like, is to me a really, really important question.
Right. And it combines the two things you're talking. So you want to get that verbatim and start there and play that back, but then how can we from there build a picture that's more easy for you to comprehend and others to?
Yes, exactly. And that's that sort of building a picture is also obviously particularly important. And partly it's important for me even if I was just coaching somebody, one-to-one, it was just between us. I really want to understand what they're doing, what they're seeing, how they feel, those things. But if it is one of those situations where I'm trying to solve a problem, and I'm talking to lots of people, then you've got to put all these sort of very tangible things together. And one of the lessons I have learned in terms of solving organizational or team problems is you've actually got to reserve judgment a lot of the time, not on the people themselves at all, but on
you
what
definitely
the
judge them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, actually, yeah, I think. I think sometimes people worry that you're coming into or whatever it is, and I have certainly been in the situation where that seemed to have been happening to me. That's what I was working one time at the Guardian, and some external consultants were brought in, and I had a one-to-one interview with one of these people, and I did not take well to them, I have to say. And it was because, looking back on it, because they clearly had their own solutions already. They had, at the start of the conversation, they had their own solutions. They weren't listening to me. It was basically, what do you think if we did this? What do you think if we did that? Why would you do this or that? Tell me what problem you're trying to solve here. What are you trying to improve? What do you think's wrong with us that you think, So I do make a point of saying to people very often, look, I'm a temporary person here. I am the most disposable person in the company. Okay. And I want successes, from what I do in place. But usually people know I am here to solve a particular problem that probably they voiced as well. But reserving judgment on what are important topics or what are important themes. And I do, when I talk to people, particularly in those situations, I do a lot of writing and I do a lot of highlighting afterwards of interesting things that people said. And afterwards try to pick out the themes. And sometimes you find someone says something really interesting, but actually they're the only person who highlighted that particular issue, and everyone else is talking about something else. And think, okay, well, let's follow the something else, even though what they said was actually kind of interesting, but not necessarily on topic or the cause of the thing we're trying to work out here.
So it sounds to me then you're managing your own sort of emerging judgments and inner dialogue about this situation you're in. You're actively keeping that in check.
Yeah, well, absolutely, and I have I of course have a sort of short bullet list of things I want to find out about, because those are the things that I was given almost first of all. So there are topics I want to hit, but I want to explore those with people, and different people will talk about different things. And also what you will find is a story evolves in a sort of patchwork kind of way around particular projects or particular incidents or particular relationships, and so by talking to lots of people you get a more complete view. And then the other sort of just going back to that point of sort of quoting people verbatim. so what I do a lot of the time in these situations is not just find the themes that people are talking about, but also say, this is actually what people are saying. And of course, people don't tend to talk in beautifully grammatical sentences when they're talking. They don't talk like they're writing a scientific paper or a novel or anything like that. And that's a good thing, actually. That's a good thing, because that means, usually I write down more or less what they're saying, not necessarily with the ers and ums, but certainly sometimes with the sort of roundabout sentences and phrases that sort of don't quite work and that kind of stuff. But that's how people talk. And when you say something like, what was one of a finding that I've come across before is, people understand that quality is important, but they don't know what it means. For example, and then there's a bunch of phrases from people where they're more or less, saying that kind of thing, and you can put these on a screen to the CEO or the CTO or whatever, or indeed the people themselves, and people will look at that and say, well, first of all, that sounds like a real person talking. So it does hit home. It's not like a survey, or 27% of respondents said, blah blah blah, which is okay, possibly powerful, but not as powerful as seeing human words. Really spoken by a human on screen. That sounds like a real person. That might have been me who said that. So listening to people, listening to their actual words, and reflecting their actual words is very, very powerful.
Right, that's interesting. And I was actually going to ask the question: do you use any survey tools or any data to back this up? But yeah,
no, actually, and that's typically. I mean, I tend not to be working across that kind of scale of organization. Okay. I'm talking in an organization, or just going back to I've mentioned an organization of a couple of hundred people, of whom I talked to about 20.
Okay.
You can't spend time talking to 200 individuals. Even in the organization that generated that sort of report annually, which took 22 months. That was a multi-thousand person organization. But in terms of the particular problem domain, it was about 100 people who were involved. And again, only, again, sort of 15, 20, 30 of those people are really the ones who will have the insights. So it is about I'm sure they call it qualitative rather than quantitative, but it's about talking to people, but it's also about demonstrating the evidence, or at least the stories that people have behind them, and linking those things together as well. This is how these things, X follows from Y follows from Z kind of thing.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So now you've explored the problem space, and you're starting to move into potential solutions or changes. I know a big topic of interest for you is, how do we introduce change? How do we start working with solutions? So how do you approach that?
So I think I guess there is a couple of situations there. One is where I am making some recommendations and then stepping away, because that's, we want you in for 3 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever it is, and just tell us what we need to do. And the other situation is where I am there to actually make the change or the improvement or whatever it is. There's a slightly two different situations. One is I need to the first situation where I'm there for a short amount of time and need to deliver a report. You've got to deliver something that is within itself a coherent and defensible piece of work, which explains the problem and the solutions, and it all has tied together and it's wrapped up with a metaphorical bow. And there you go. And hopefully, fingers crossed, people will follow through with that. And sometimes they do, which is great. And the other situation is where I am there to make the change. Although often in those situations, it's less. I wasn't brought in necessarily to make a change. I was brought in to sort of help deliver a project or whatever it is. But it turns out that the reason the project isn't working terribly well or whatever is certain things need to change, and that's a slightly different situation. So it's the sort of recommending versus the implementing. So the recommending needs a these are the problems you have with sort of demonstrations of what people are saying about those things. And also, I sometimes use a just sort of boxes and arrows, really. We've identified, I don't know, 20 things within themes which people are talking about, and this leads to this, and that leads to that, and that leads to the other, and so forth. So you can get a sort of nice diagram like that, and then you can say, okay, if we tackle the thing right at the top, then that will help that bring the most value of those kinds of things. And also the suggested remedies are of course based on experience, industry experience, and the kinds of things that actually you can point to other people are doing it like this and other people are doing that kind of thing. So it will never be something I've just sort of devised off the top of my head. It's saying, well, this is a common thing which people are doing in industry, and this is how they do it, and this is what good looks like, and this is why it will solve, address this particular thing. For the actual implementing part of it, where I'm there, and if there's less of a need to produce a marvelous report or PowerPoint presentation, it's get on with the work and continue to make improvements, and that's the making the change. And then the important things are, apart from identifying what you need to do, is to persuade people that these are the things that need to happen. And part of that is reminding people, if they need reminding, remember, this is what you said, or this is what your colleagues said. I have the, we have the quote here. You saw the quote on the PowerPoint. So this is why we need that. So bringing people back to what they said, what they are told, or what their colleagues articulated, what they might as well have said themselves, is really, really important. And again, so that's the sort of the persuading them part of it. When you implement a change, there are lots of very sort of detailed, nitty-gritty things that you need to do and you need to get right. And again, it's really, really important to take people along with you, explain the sort of small steps involved in this, and listen to objections. The objections by that stage are typically not, or generally not, that we should, whether or not we should do this. It's about actually how we do it. And those are often really important objections to listen to, because these are people who are on the ground. These are people who have to not just live with it, but make the change themselves. They have to be comfortable with it. So as I say, this is not going to work because X, Y, and Z, or I'd be very unhappy about doing that kind of thing because of whatever. Understand why, and always, the thing I always take people back to, whether it's in a change situation or just, if I happen to be line managing people, then sort of resolving a dispute between two people, it's let's remind ourselves why we're trying to do this thing. I'm not, it's not really important to me that step 7A is this rather than that. The point is that we get to the end point and that we achieve such and such a thing. So getting myself to take a step back and them to take a step back, and reminding ourselves why we're doing this is really key, because that helps us generally get to a better solution. And and the other thing is, even if I am line managing a team of people responsible for a department of software engineers or whatever it is, I can't be there in every situation, every hour of every day. This is something people got to believe themselves and got to want to do themselves and understand themselves. So getting their support, understanding their objections, adjusting accordingly, and then trying a bit, seeing what happens, adjust again, plan the next steps, and so forth. So that sort of feedback mechanism with the people is really, really important when it comes to implementing change.
And that makes so much sense to me, because I don't know for your experience, but I've been on many, big change programs where there's the big plan. I mean, it's to be fair, I think it's happening less and less, and people are getting the test and learn approach to a greater degree. But nonetheless, it still exists to some extent, and without realizing that, when it comes to change in teams, it's complex. You can't predict up front how things are going to pan out. And
absolutely. And one of the things I sort of remind myself from time to time is John Cotter's 8 change steps, which I can never remember off the top of my head, but all as management models go, are incredibly sensible, I think, and really, really good advice. And one of the things that is really, really important, I can't remember exactly how he talks about it, is celebrate success or amplify success. When there is somebody doing something which is, this is the way we should do it, shine the spotlight on them, celebrate them, and partly it's good for them, of course, and they deserve to be rewarded for doing the right thing. But also, it sort of sends a message to other people that, this is how people are recognised now by doing this kind of thing. And it is, as you say, there's particularly those large change programs are very, very difficult. I always have this image in my head of those I can't remember what it's called, the people who climb those very sheer cliff faces, with crampons and things, and you've got this almost sheer rock face that right. you're trying to climb. This is the change you're trying to make, and you're just grabbing onto the tiniest little crevice to pull yourself up. Somebody has done, somebody has interacted with with a customer in exactly the way we want. It's only one example this week, but we're going to celebrate that, and we're going to mention it and make sure people know about it and amplify that.
Yeah, I like that metaphor, because when it comes to changing human behavior, every small change is a major breakthrough, right? Because we are so habitualized as people, and it does take something.
And the other thing is, I think it sort of almost depends. I think different people have different views on this, and I do remember your views on this would be really, really interesting. I remember there was part of a sort of big change program, which was I would say it was an informal change program, as it was being sort of pushed by a director of this organization, and people were, people knew it had to happen, but it wasn't hugely formal. And I was one of the people helping with this, and had encountered a team which were they were testing a particular product that they were producing, and it was a very old-fashioned, non-digital product that they were spending their time on, but they were doing it in a way which was actually surprisingly in line with the new ways of working. It was sort of quite sort of more scientific A/B testing, as we call it, but it was a non-digital product. And it's in a conversation with the director, who's very senior, and he was absolutely livid that they were spending time testing this old-fashioned non-digital product when they should be spending time on the digital thing. And I was thinking, well, I'm actually delighted that they're doing something akin to A/B testing, which is something we can praise them for. And say, no, great, now take that and move it into the digital world, because that's what you need to be doing. It was kind of it was a glass half full, glass half empty situation, but also because he was the big boss man, he was probably used to making changes by edict, by making an order and expecting people to fall in line. Whereas I was in a situation where I didn't have anyone to report. I didn't report to me. I just had to work by influence.
Yeah.
And of course, people have to believe these things in order for them to last. So yeah, it'd be interesting to know if you see people's attitudes is different depending on their role in terms of how easy it is to make change, or how much you have to sort of be not subservient to people, but listen to people to enact change, or whether you can just sort of say, no, do it. I'm telling you to do it.
Well, I suppose what immediately comes to mind is excuse me, theory X, theory Y. Familiar with that?
Go on, to remind me of theory.
Yeah. So, do you believe that people are inherently lazy and untrustworthy? Yeah, and require strong management in order to be productive. So, if that's your belief about people, you're going to manage it in a certain way, whether that be change or anything else. Or theory Y, which is you inherently believe that people are trustworthy, that people are inherently productive, and so if that's your fundamental belief about human beings, then you're going to lead and manage according to that.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's yes, that opens up so many questions. There was I know there was an interview which I know was conducted recently with Tony Danker, head of the CBI, who's apparently saying this: all bosses in Britain basically want people to come back to the office. They don't want them to work from home. And to me, that's that theory X, theory Y. Then you do trust people, or do you want to see them, in front of you in order to believe whether they're working or not? That's and the other thing I wonder about all of this, because again, we've talked a lot about listening to people, and I know we've talked about it very much in the context of making change and so forth. But to me, listening to people and understanding their problems is a really, really important part of just general management. If there's no major problem, I'm just sort of being an interim leader or whatever, and I have a number of direct reports. It's important, again, to me to have one-to-ones with my staff and listen to them. And if they have issues, sort them out. And as because of the industry I'm in, which is, the tech industry, or in organizations where there is a strong tech function, there is a lot of deference towards software engineers and technical people. And I always wonder to myself, in the back of my mind, is this just a tech thing? Do accountants, for example, or civil engineers spend time worrying about how their company should run? And I do remember talking to a software colleague of mine, saying, he was saying, my wife is a chief financial officer, and she's baffled by all these angst we have about treating people right, and employee resource groups, and making sure people understand the big picture and all that kind of stuff. She said, I run a team of 20 people, and they just do what they're told. So I don't know. But as I say, I do. To me, it is a fulfilling way of doing things, and particularly now where it's so easy for people to move, from one company to another. And apart from the sort of there's lots of layoffs, at the very moment, in the tech world, generally speaking, it's relatively easy to move company. And people, technical people, are very much in demand. So I think you have to recognise that you have to treat people as human beings. They're not just shareholder fodder.
Right. Well, I think that's true, but it does remind me of the stories of the clockmakers in the Industrial Revolution.
Oh, go on. Tell me about the
so if you were just working in a mill or in a smelter or something, right, and you were just on the production line, you were ruled with an iron, literally a whip, right? In some kind of circumstances, right?
Yeah.
That was your life. But if you were a clock engineer, you could roll in drunk, you could talk back to the boss man, right? Yeah. That was, this is another story I read about them, because they were so important, because the clock in the factory was, central to running the entire operation.
Yes,
you were a clock engineer in those days. Yeah.
And I think I think we have to watch out for that, because we in the tech world may become replaced by something else. So to be the other thing, I would say to be fair, I think every company more or less has what I call its rock stars. Every company has the discipline within it, within which the whole company was built around. The Guardian was a very digital organization, is very very, very forward thinking there now. But the rock stars weren't the tech people. The rock stars are the journalists, of course.
Right.
That's who the organization is built around. In an investment bank, it's the investors. Those are the people who, as you say, wouldn't necessarily roll in drunk, but they're the ones who everyone is deferential to. So I think we have to be careful about that in our industry.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing I would say around software engineering, the way I've done software engineering. I think I was a coder in the first part of my career. We're a creative bunch. Right? Yeah. We're inherently, there's an artistic streak in every coder, and I think that there's just an inherent reaction to that creativity, which is such a part of our identity, feeling like it's being suppressed in any way.
Yeah.
So I do think it's part of the personality profile in general of coders.
Absolutely. Yes, very true. Very true.
Which may not exist. Apologies to offending any accountants out there.
I think creative accountancy has a very different sense to it than creative software engineering.
Yeah. And I think some of those areas will, and also just the scope of the role, they may have a greater sense of what the business is doing in a way. And this is what I remember. One of my motivations to move out of coding, I can remember very clearly, is you're so focused on that line of code, right? Or getting that class to function in the way you want it to, that you're so so blinkered in a sense, and so ultra focused on that you can, and the management around you sort of wants you focused on that, right? It's so they have got an interest in shielding you from everything else. No, just write code because you've got that skill and we need it, and that's what we need you to do. And I can really get that frustration of like not getting the bigger picture and wanting to feel part of something bigger and wanting to be able to make sense of how this code I'm writing actually contributes to the bigger picture.
And go ahead.
Sorry, and I don't know what proportion of software engineers feel that, but certainly I felt it.
I think a lot do, to be honest, particularly after the early years. I think in the early years of your career, you want to hone your skill. You realize there are lots of people around you who are much more skilled than you. You sort of admire what they can do, I think, rightly, because they're amazing people, and you want to be like that. And there is that. But there is, I always remember a couple of friends of mine set up their own web software company. And the reason they did that, the sort of the thing that affected them, is that they were part of a big organization involved in a really large software project. They did the most fantastic, in their view, the most fantastic job. The software was fantastic. It was delivered on time, I think, and budget, and it completely failed. And it completely failed because there had been serious business misjudgments about what was needed. And I thought, well, I never ever want that to happen again. And you're right. You want to feel, you want to feel part of something. You want to feel you make a difference. And one of the great things about working for a particular brand name company, like the Guardian. I keep talking about the Guardian. That was a very, very long time ago. But working for a brand name company is people recognize what you do, or you can point to something on somebody's screen and say, I did that. Whether it's if you're a games developer, you can point, I did that. That mechanic or whatever it was. People, and you're appreciated by, let's say people who don't understand, the tech. So I think it is important to sort of have that connection, and that's one of the things that also when it comes back to my work, one of the things I do from time to time is help organizations which have delivery problems. They're not getting, the project isn't going hugely well for whatever reason. One of the things that is often really, really important is to connect the people on the ground to the people who value the thing that you're going to deliver. So that is maybe talking to the stakeholders, maybe your internal stakeholders who are sponsoring the project, or it's going along and watching the user test, watching users actually try to use your product, and that connection, a sort of very, very tangible connection, is really, really important, I think, to people. I remember the first time I saw. I was working with a user experience person, as we call them, someone who goes out and tests the product with people. And I'd never worked with such a person before. Didn't really know what he did. And then he made what he called a show reel. So he videoed lots of people using the product, and spliced it all together and done a little 5-minute, presentation on this is how people struggle with the product. And it was just jaw-dropping. To me, it's obvious how everything works. To other people, not. And you think, oh, okay, this is why it's worth. And it happens with a sort of organization administrative things as well. So I was working with a company one time who had a very tightly defined list of things they wanted implemented in the software product we were building for them, which to some extent is fine. You've got to know what you want, but for various reasons, we're having problems delivering to the time scale that they wanted. We thought we could deliver something that still achieved their overall aim, but by doing it in a slightly different way, and that would deliver on time. So we wanted to flex a little bit, and they were absolutely not having it. It was really, really annoying the team. They were getting very angry. And then one time they came into the office, the actual people who we were delivering for, and met some of the team who was building this thing, and we talked about their situation and so forth. And it turned out that they were owned by a Japanese parent company, and one of their number had sort of submitted a list of things that this is what we will deliver, a sort of 20-point tick list of features and so on, and that's what they were held to. And so even though they themselves were very, very open to change, there was a social, strong social element where they could not go back on a promise they had made, or one of their number had made, to the Japanese parent company. And suddenly the engineers felt an awful lot of sympathy for them. And the animosity, disappeared. And so we did eventually work to a point. We delivered the thing they wanted, and then on the next phase, we were, we set it up so we were a little bit more flexible and so forth. But that sort of human aspect of meet the people, feel for the people who you're doing this thing for, who want this thing, is really, really important. That helps just some really basic things like focusing people and helping delivery and so forth.
Right. Yeah. No, that's it's a great anecdote. Yeah. We were talking, and I thought it might be a good segue. So you spoke earlier about the possibility of software engineers being replaced by AI, and we talked about this earlier, right? And given your background and your PhD in that field, what's your current assessment of the maturity of AI? Where do you predict it's going to be going? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
My predictions about where things are going are always really, really off. Embarrassingly so, which I will not embarrass myself with by telling how wrong I can be about how useful the internet might be. But I do believe it's going to be, it is a game changer, or going to be a game changer. I think there are real challenges in terms of ownership, let's say, of that IP or that expertise. I can't quite sort out in my head exactly where the challenges are, because to some extent, if I'm a software engineer, let's say, and if I'm a software engineer and I'm working for a company, for you, of course, you own the IP, but I can still take my business elsewhere if I want. I can still quit and go elsewhere. So there's no sense in which you own me as a software engineer. So if you replace me with an AI, okay. But to me, the ownership issues are such that ChatGPT is the big one at the moment.
Yeah.
And of course, all that knowledge, all that expertise, all that data is growing and growing within OpenAI, the company that owns ChatGPT. So anyone who, yes, you're using AI, you're using ChatGPT, but they're a third party, and they're a third party who might raise their prices, beyond your beyond your means, or beyond what you think is valuable. And any data you have, obviously or any results you have, yes, you're using it, but they're using it as well. There is, there's clearly concerns around plagiarism and that kind of thing. I've certainly worked with at least one company which said, GitHub, the software source control organization, which is owned by Microsoft, has a thing called Copilot, which can auto-generate software for you, which is astonishing. But I work with one company that says you absolutely must not use this for company software generated, for company software, because we don't know where it comes from. We have no guarantees about where it comes from. And yes, there may be some legal provisions in the terms of service of Copilot and so forth, but nevertheless, we just don't want to get into that that situation. So there are those kinds of things. But I think there is this question of how big a resource do you need to have a useful artificial intelligence service? Is it something you can build and own yourself, or is it something you have to outsource to someone like OpenAI? Now, of course, I think outsourcing those kinds of services is not necessarily a bad thing, but you've got to be aware that you might need to take those services elsewhere. Somewhere they may shut down, they may raise their prices, they may do something legally, which think, okay, we can't do that. Can you have an alternative? Is there an alternative to fall back on? How much can you transfer? The biggest companies will be developing and are, do develop their own AI process. But I think it's important. The two examples that have hit home for me are a very small company I know that does document cataloging as part of its overall process, which is a team of 4 people or something, and they've tried ChatGPT for documenting, and it's bloody good and 10 times as fast. And so they're thinking, well, if we don't do this, our competitors, going to do it. So, so it's got to be part of that. And the other example I know is a large organization which is using artificial intelligence. I think it's their own thing that they've developed internally for planning logistics, which again is something you would do with what we used to call an expert system, rules and actually carefully defined rules by experts, and this thing is acting as an expert. But they're developing, I think, in that situation, that second situation for logistics, they own that IP, so that's fine. But for the smaller company, it's not their wrong. I'm sure they're absolutely right to be using this thing. And by the way, their staff, I speak to someone involved. The 14 staff who are working alongside ChatGPT are actually very happy with this because that bit of their jobs was really boring. And they're now able to concentrate on sort of slightly better, sort of more interesting things. But nevertheless, how long does that last? How much are you going to pay for it? What's your fallback if it doesn't work out? And then there's the whole question of ethics from all kinds of angles. I think what I know of OpenAI is they have sourced their data from quite reputable sources, but plenty of companies have not. Certainly when it comes to facial recognition systems, there are all kinds of, not just how those systems are being used, but actually where the data came from in the first place. So yeah, it's an absolute minefield. But unfortunately, as with all progress, it doesn't stop.
No. And you just introduced me to an aspect that I hadn't really considered before. So there's certainly the aspect of replacing jobs, but I hadn't really considered the replacing smaller companies. You could make the case it's inherently a winner takes all type situation, right? Where you could predict that a few very large companies with very large data sets are going to win this game and knock out not just individuals but smaller companies.
Absolutely. Google is in trouble now because it's may have a monopoly on the ad industry. Imagine having a monopoly on the intelligence industry. That's pretty serious.
I really hadn't considered that. We could have an equivalent of Google for AI. I mean, that is pretty terrifying, isn't it?
Exactly. So I mean, and again, to be fair, I think from what I can tell, OpenAI are being very good, in by some sense of good about all of this. They're publishing their research. There are data sets and versions of GPT that they have held back because of ethics issues. So I think they are being responsible, but there will always be people pushing at the boundaries, and there will always be people happy to use those companies that are pushing at the boundaries. So I think it's going to get that way.
Right. And so, you said you wouldn't give predictors, but But you said Copilot's pretty good. Just going back specifically to writing software, you said Copilot's pretty good. And that's now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that's now. There are going to be some laws or decisions which are new, but I think there are going to be some principles on which legal decisions are made, which are just basic legal principles. So, you know, if I contract services from you, and for whatever reason you don't provide those services or don't provide them in a satisfactory way, it doesn't matter. Now, I'm not a lawyer, I have to stress this, but you know, my understanding is it doesn't matter whether it's literally your staff who messed up or whether you subcontracted it out to a third party, if you know, in old terms, human third party. The fact is they're your agents. You know, whether they're employees or a contracted third party, you're still responsible. Some sort of things like that. You know, whether you contract it out to a human or an AI. Again, it doesn't matter. You did the contracting. You decided that was the right thing to do. You know, you didn't provide services, but yeah, no. Some of those challenges are going to be very, very different. And some of those things are up to us as well. So to decide. So I think it's CNET publishing organization has been for a long time publishing articles for search engine optimization, just to get onto the top of Google, generated by an AI. Now, is that a bad thing? I mean, generating pages just to get to the top of Google, I think, is a bad thing because I want high quality Google results. But does it have to be done by a human? I don't know. So they paused that program because I think, you know, they hid some of the truth behind that, and also it has to be said, some of those articles that were produced were not entirely correct. You know, again, people can make mistakes as well, but at least you can point the finger, you know, more easily, or coach somebody, you know, get an improvement in somebody more easily. More difficult when it's an AI which is only does one thing and doesn't, you know, you can't take it into a room and say, look, you've done this and this wrong, you know, maybe we can, you know, maybe we can improve by doing X, Y, and Z. Can't do that with an AI.
No. Okay, well, Nik, this has been a fantastic conversation. Is there anything we haven't touched on that you'd like to share with our listeners? Any place we haven't gone to you'd have loved to?
Gosh, I'm you know, thrilled to have had the chance to speak to you. Thank you very much. I mean, I'm sure we could talk for a while more, but I'm sure your listeners need to be able to go off and do whatever they need to do.
No, this has been awesome. Thanks so much for sharing your deep insights from a long time working in these spaces. Very valuable.
Thank you, Richard. It's really been really, really brilliant. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Nik.